My mother told me the greatest gift for my sister's wedding was for me to disappear forever, never realizing that I hold evidence of a $2 million fraud powerful enough to incinerate this entire dynasty. They want me gone, fine, but I am taking the entire future of the Vance empire with me. The air in Aspen Hollow always tasted of pine, and inherited wealth a combination that usually suffocated me before I even stepped across the threshold of the Vance estate. The driveway was a winding ribbon of crushed white stone leading to a colonial-style mansion that stood like a monument to a legacy I was never meant to inherit. As I pulled my weathered truck into the shadow of the towering oak trees, the contrast felt like a physical weight. The lawn was meticulously manicured for the upcoming wedding of my sister Sloane, decorated with strings of white lanterns that flickered like artificial stars against the twilight. Inside the house smelled of burning pine wood and expensive lemon polish. It was a scent that should have signaled comfort, but for me, it always meant the beginning of a performance where I had no lines. The foyer was crowded with boxes of artisan chocolates and silver-edged invitations. In the center of the living room, an antique wall clock hung its gilded hands, frozen at exactly 12 minutes past 3. It had been broken for as long as I could remember. My father Arthur insisted that its silence provided a sense of timeless elegance, but to me, that clock was the most honest thing in the house. It represented exactly how I existed within this family, stuck non-functional and ignored, while the rest of the world moved forward. My eyes drifted toward the glass display case that lined the far wall. It was a shrine to my sister Sloane. There were her debate trophies from Yale, her framed tech awards, and photographs of her shaking hands with venture capitalists in San Francisco. Hidden in the bottom corner, obscured by a stack of Sloane's old equestrian ribbons, was a small, dusty frame. It was the certificate I had received at 17 for regional musical composition. It was the only proof that I had ever possessed a dream of my own, yet it was treated like a footnote in a book about someone else's greatness. The sound of laughter drifted from the dining room, sharp and polished. I walked toward it, my footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs. My mother, Eleanor Vance, was seated at the head of the long mahogany table, her eyes scanning a seating chart with the precision of a general planning a siege. She did not look up when I entered. She did not need to. She could sense my presence the way one senses a draft in a room, an annoyance to be corrected. "You are late, Julian," she said, her voice cool and rhythmic. "The catering coordinator needed those floral specifications an hour ago. I cannot have the staff waiting on your schedule. This weekend must be flawless. Sloane has worked too hard for her reputation to be tarnished by administrative incompetence." I opened my mouth to explain that the florist had changed the delivery window, but the words died in my throat. I looked at Arthur, who was standing by the fireplace nursing a glass of scotch. He stared into the flames, his expression as unyielding as the stone mantel. He did not offer a greeting. He only adjusted the cuff of his silk shirt and murmured, "Just do as your mother says, Julian. Do not make this more difficult than it already is. We have a certain image to maintain, especially with the investors arriving tomorrow." Image. That was the currency of the Vance household. Everything was a stage set, and I was merely the stagehand, the one meant to move the furniture in the dark so the stars could shine in the light. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, a feeling of being compressed into a space too small for a human soul to breathe. I was 24 years old, yet, in this room, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Sloane appeared in the doorway, then draped in a silk robe, her hair perfectly styled even in her downtime. She glanced at me with a smile that was polite but distant. "Did you manage to find the specific irises I wanted, Julian, the ones from the northern grower?" "I did," I replied, my voice sounding hollow. "I drove 4 hours to get them." She nodded, already turning back to her phone. "Good. Make sure they are kept at the correct temperature. It would be a disaster if they wilted before the ceremony." "No, thank you. Only instructions for the next task." I stood there, holding a stack of invoices, feeling the heat of the fire behind me and the coldness of my family in front of me. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the wood. Eleanor finally looked me in the eye. Her gaze was filled with a clinical kind of disdain. She stood up, smoothing the invisible wrinkles in her dress, and walked toward me. She stopped just inches away, the scent of her expensive perfume clashing with the smell of the wood smoke. "Julian," she whispered, her voice low, "I want you to understand something. This wedding is the culmination of everything we have built for your sister. It is about excellence. It is about the Vance name." She paused, her eyes raking over my tired face. "The greatest gift you could possibly give for your sister's wedding is if you disappeared from our family forever. Your presence is a stain on your sister's wedding dress. You are the shadow we do not want the world to see." The words stripped the air from my lungs. I did not cry. I simply looked at the broken clock on the wall and realized that, for the first time in 24 years, my time was finally starting. I turned around, gripped my keys until they bit into my palm, and walked out into the cold mountain night. The door slammed shut behind me like a final punctuation mark, and as I drove away from Aspen Hollow, I did not look back. The rain lashed against the windows of my small apartment in the city, a stark contrast to the hollow silence of Aspen Hollow. I sat at my kitchen table, the light from my laptop screen casting a pale clinical blue across my face. In my haste to leave the Vance estate, I had grabbed a weathered leather expanding file from my father's mahogany desk, a file I had seen him hide away 1,000 times. It was labeled with 3 simple letters, JRV, my initials. Julian Reed Vance. For 24 years I had been told that I was a liability. I had been raised to believe that my existence was a series of quiet failures, a debt I could never fully repay to the parents who had provided me with a roof and a name. I remembered being 12 years old, sitting at the piano and being told that the electricity I used to practice was a luxury the family could ill afford because of market fluctuations. I remembered being 18 and handing over my entire summer scholarship fund because my mother Eleanor claimed the estate was on the verge of foreclosure. I opened the file, and the first thing that hit me was not a letter of affection or a childhood drawing. It was a spreadsheet. As I scrolled through the digital backups and scanned the physical receipts tucked into the sleeves, the breath left my body. I was not a son in these pages. I was an asset. I was a line item in a ledger of exploitation that stretched back over a decade. There was a transfer receipt from 3 years ago. $8,000 moved from my personal savings account, money I had earned working double shifts at a local warehouse while attending university, into Eleanor's private account. The memo line, written in her elegant looping script, read, "Family management fee." It was not a fee. It was the money I had set aside for my final semester's tuition. I remembered her crying in the kitchen, telling me that the taxes on the house were overdue and that we would all be on the street if I did not help. I had given it to her gladly, feeling a sense of noble sacrifice. According to the ledger, the taxes had been paid months in advance. My $8,000 had gone toward a specialized wellness retreat in Sedona. I turned the page, my fingers trembling. I found a series of invoices for the restoration of the guest wing at Aspen Hollow. The total was $15,000. Beneath the invoice was a copy of a check drawn from the trust fund my grandfather had left me for educational purposes. My father, Arthur, had convinced me to sign the authorization forms, telling me it was a temporary bridge loan to keep the family business afloat during a rough quarter. The business was not in trouble. The ledger showed that on the exact same day the $15,000 were deducted from my trust. Arthur had settled a private debt with a high-stakes casino in Blackhawk. He had used my future to pay for his past mistakes, all while looking me in the eye and telling me that I was the one who made their lives complicated. The evidence was relentless. Every time I had repaired a burst pipe, every time I had driven Eleanor to her medical appointments across the state, every time I had fetched prescriptions or handled the groundskeeping because they could not afford a professional, it was logged. But it was not logged as an act of service. It was logged as a cost-saving measure. They had calculated exactly how much money they saved by using me as unpaid labor. One particular entry turned my stomach. It was a medical bill from last winter when Eleanor claimed to have suffered a debilitating heart episode. I had stayed awake for 48 hours sitting by her bed handling every detail of the house so she could rest. The bill for the private nursing consultant was $4,000. It had been paid directly from my account via a pre-signed check I had left for emergencies. The consultant's report was attached. It did not mention a heart episode. It described a series of cosmetic fillers and a minor elective procedure that Eleanor wanted to keep quiet from her social circle. She had used my fear for her life to fund her vanity. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had spent 24 years shrinking myself, apologizing for taking up space and working myself to the bone to earn my place in a family that was actively harvesting my life. They did not hate me because I was a failure. They hated me because my presence was a constant reminder of the person they were robbing. I was their silent accountant, their safety net, and their scapegoat. By making me feel like I was nothing, they ensured that I would never ask for what was actually mine. I looked at the clock on my wall. It was 4 a.m. For the first time in my life, the weight in my chest did not feel like guilt. It felt like cold, hard clarity. Eleanor had told me that the greatest gift I could give was to disappear. She wanted me gone because if I disappeared, the evidence of their theft would disappear with me. If I was not there to witness the lies would become the only truth left. I saved Sarah Beth Sterling's number to my favorites and drafted a message I would send when I had proof that could not be erased. I did not care what time it was. I was no longer a ghost in the Vance household. I was the creditor, and it was time to collect. I sat in the blue light of the screen, the ledger of my life open before me, and for the first time, I did not feel small. I felt dangerous. The awakening was complete. I closed the file with a snap that echoed through the empty apartment. I was done paying for a life I was not allowed to live. I returned to the Vance estate under the cover of a relentless mountain storm. I had left my primary digital backup in the guest room, a mistake that could cost me everything if Arthur discovered the encrypted files. I entered through the mudroom, moving with the practiced silence of a man who had spent 24 years trying to be invisible. The house was dimly lit, the opulent hallways casting long, distorted shadows. As I approached the library, the heavy oak doors were cracked open just an inch. I stopped when I heard my name. "Julian is gone, Arthur. You handled the exit perfectly," a voice said. It was Pierce Sloane's fiancé. His tone was no longer the polished, charming mask he wore for the investors. It was cold, transactional, and predatory. But we need to ensure he stays unreachable. If he tries to contact the bank or check his credit profile before the merger closes on Monday, this entire structure collapses. I froze my back against the cold stone wall. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to remain shallow and even. "He will not," my father replied, his voice devoid of any parental warmth. "Julian has spent his entire life believing he is a burden. He is currently halfway to the coast, wallowing in the guilt Eleanor planted. He thinks he is protecting Sloane's reputation by vanishing. He has no idea that his disappearance is the final piece of the Vance-Pierce acquisition." "Good," Pierce replied. I heard the rustle of heavy parchment, the sound of high-stakes contracts. Because the $2 million bridge loan is secured against his name and his specific Social Security number. By the time the first payment is due and the default notice hits his mailbox, the funds will have already been diverted through the offshore shell company. Sloane and I will have the capital to launch the new firm, and the Vance estate will be cleared of its current liabilities. "And Julian," Arthur asked, his voice steady. "Julian will be the one the federal auditors come looking for," Pierce said with a sharp, humorless laugh. "He is the signatory on the fraudulent documents. He is the one who authorized the high-interest debt. By the time he realizes what has happened, he will be buried under 24 months of litigation. He is the perfect fall guy because he has no witnesses, no influence, and now no family to back his story." A wave of icy fury washed over me. It was not just the theft of my money anymore. It was the theft of my freedom, my name, and my future. They were not just casting me out, they were using me as a human shield for their financial crimes. I waited until I heard them move into the adjoining wet bar, their glasses clinking in a celebratory toast to my ruin. I slipped into the library, my footsteps silent on the rug. The desk was cluttered with folders, but one stood out a thick navy blue binder embossed with the Pierce Group logo. I opened it, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. There it was, a joint liability agreement for a $2 million private equity loan. I scrolled down to the signature page. At the bottom, in the space reserved for the primary guarantor, was my name. The signature was a perfect, chilling imitation of my own handwriting. It was a forgery so precise that even I had to look twice. Beside it was a date from 3 days ago, the same day Eleanor had told me she was having a heart episode and needed me to stay in the kitchen to manage the household staff. They had used my distraction, my fear for her life, as a window to finalize the theft of my identity. They had signed away my life while I was in the next room worrying about her breathing. I took out my phone, my hands steady with a cold, crystalline purpose. I photographed every page of the contract, the forged signatures and the riders that detailed the diversion of funds to an account in the Cayman Islands. I captured the wire transfer instructions that linked the loan directly to Arthur's private business debts. As I stood in the darkness of the library, the rage that had been a dull ache for 2 decades transformed into something sharp and surgical. I was no longer the son who sought their approval. I was the witness they had failed to silence. Arthur and Pierce thought they were playing a game of chess against a pawn. They had no idea that I had been studying the board for years. They wanted me to disappear. I would give them exactly what they asked for, but not in the way they expected. I would not be the ghost they could blame for their crimes. I would be the ghost that dismantled their empire from the shadows. I slipped out of the library and back into the storm. As the rain drenched my clothes, I felt a strange sense of power. The Vance name was a cage, and they had just handed me the key to burn it down. I reached for my phone and sent an encrypted message to David Michael Rhodes. "It is worse than we thought," I wrote. "They have moved $2 million under my name. I have the proof. Start the freeze. We are not just protecting my assets anymore. We are going for the throat." I drove away from Aspen Hollow for the final time. The lights of the mansion faded in my rearview mirror, a golden tomb for a family that never existed. They had tried to trap me in a golden cage of debt, but they had forgotten one thing. A man who has already been told he is nothing has absolutely nothing left to lose. I was Julian Reed Vance, and for the first time in 24 years, I was the one holding the pen. The rain hammered against the roof of my truck as I sat in a dark gravel parking lot 5 miles from the gates of Aspen Hollow. My hands were shaking, not from the biting mountain cold, but from the sheer velocity of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard, 2 o'clock in the morning. I had less than 48 hours before the banking systems in New York cycled for the new week. I dialed the private number for Sarah Beth Sterling. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and devoid of sleep. "Julian," she said, sensing the urgency before I could speak. "What has happened?" "They did it, Sarah," I whispered, my voice cracking before I steadied it. "They forged my signature on a $2 million bridge loan. It is secured against my Social Security number and my primary identity. Pierce and my father are planning to divert the funds through a shell company on Monday morning. I am the fall guy for a $2 million default." There was a brief, sharp silence on the other end of the line. "Listen to me very carefully, Julian," Sarah replied, her tone shifting into a gear of pure professional steel. "We are entering a race against the clock. If those funds are dispersed into an account linked to your identity, the debt becomes a legal anchor that will drown you for decades. We have to dismantle your financial presence before the banks open on Monday. We are going to execute a scorched earth policy." "Tell me what to do," I said, opening my laptop and tethering it to a secure encrypted hotspot I had prepared weeks ago. "First, we activate the identity theft protection protocols," she instructed. "I am flagging your profile with the Federal Trade Commission immediately. You need to log into the 3 major credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. You are going to freeze credit access entirely. Do not just alert them. Lock the door and throw away the key. No one, not even Arthur Vance, will be able to open a line of credit or verify a loan in your name by sunrise. My fingers flew across the keyboard. With every click, I felt a heavy iron bolt sliding into place. Experian is frozen, I muttered. Equifax is locked. TransUnion is processing. The words, access denied, appeared on the screen in a stark red font. For the first time in my life, those words did not feel like a rejection. They felt like a shield. Now, the assets. David Michael Rhodes joined the conference, call his voice a low, rhythmic bass. Julian, we are moving every cent of your warehouse savings and the remnants of your grandfather's inheritance into an irrevocable trust. I have the documents drafted. By placing your liquid assets into this trust, they are no longer legally considered yours for the purpose of a seizure or a lawsuit. The Vance family cannot touch them, and more importantly, the creditors from Pierce's fraudulent loan will have no claim against them. You are becoming a legal ghost to the traditional banking system. I signed the digital documents with a steady hand. I was watching my life as Julian Reed Vance being dismantled and rebuilt into a fortress that my family could not penetrate. One more thing, I said, my heart pounding as I pulled up the contact for my realtor, Laura. The apartment in the city, I cannot leave it as a lingering tie. I dialed Laura's number. She picked up, sounding groggy and confused. Julian, it is 5 in the morning on a Saturday. Laura lists the apartment now, I said, my voice cold and uncompromising. Market value is $400,000. Listed for $345,000. I want a fire sale price. I want a cash buyer who can close by the end of the day. No contingencies, no inspections, no delays. If they have the cash, the keys are theirs. Julian, you are losing $55,000 in equity, she gasped. I am not losing money, Laura. I am buying my freedom, I replied. Do it now. By 6 o'clock in the morning, the digital walls were up. My credit was a fortress that no forged signature could breach. My remaining funds were vanishing into the protective shadows of the irrevocable trust. My apartment was a pending sale destined to belong to a stranger before the sun reached its zenith. I looked at the sunrise over the jagged peaks of Aspen Hollow. For 24 years, that light had signaled another day of servitude, another day of being the silent ghost in a house of mirrors. But as the gold light hit the windshield, it felt different. The clock was still ticking, but for the first time, I was the one who controlled the rhythm. I took the SIM card out of my phone, snapped it in half, and tossed it into the rushing mountain stream beside the parking lot. I was Julian Reed Vance, and I was finally moving faster than the lies they had built to contain me. The race was far from over, but as I put the truck into gear and pointed it toward the coast, I knew one thing for certain: they were never going to catch me. Port Juniper was a world away from the suffocating luxury of Aspen Hollow. The air here was thick with salt and wood smoke, and the constant rhythm of the tide hitting the pilings acted as a metronome for my new life. I had rented a small cottage with windows freckled by decades of sea spray. For the first week, I did nothing but breathe. I was a ghost in a town of strangers, and the anonymity felt like a benediction. One afternoon, while unpacking the few crates I had managed to salvage, I reached for my battered guitar case. Tucked deep behind the velvet lining was a yellowed envelope I had not opened in years. It was from Silas Avery, my music teacher left to me shortly before he passed away. I had been too consumed by the Vance family drama to truly read it. I sat on the creaking porch and pulled out the letter. Silas' handwriting was shaky but deliberate. Julian, it began, they will try to tell you that your music is a distraction. They will tell you it has no value. But you must understand that Arthur Vance did not just steal my career, he stole a language. Years ago, I developed a proprietary audio encryption method, a way to embed digital watermarks into sound frequencies. Arthur used his capital to bury my patent and rebranded it as the foundation of the Vance Group security software. The melody I taught you, the one we called the Vance theme, is not just a song, it is the master key. It is the original sequence that proves the technology belongs to the Avery estate, not the Vance name. I could never prove it in court, but you have the ears to finish what I started." My heart stopped. I looked at the legal pad where I had been composing chord. The rising and falling chords I had written were not just inspired by the sea. They were a subconscious reconstruction of the frequencies Silas had drilled into me. Chord was not just music. It was a digital fingerprint. It was an audio confession. I spent 3 days locked in my cottage using my laptop to layer the melodies. I realized that if I played the sequence in a specific harmonic order, it triggered a frequency response that only the original, uncorrupted Vance software would recognize. It was the audio watermark Silas had described. By completing the song, I was effectively unlocking the proof that my father's entire tech empire was built on stolen intellectual property. The day of Sloane's wedding arrived. While the socialites of Aspen Hollow gathered in the refurbished barn under thousands of dollars of imported flowers, I sat in the dim light of my coastal rental. I watched the live stream of the event on a burner laptop. Arthur stood at the podium, looking every bit the proud patriarch, ready to announce the merger with the Pierce Group, a merger built on the fraudulent $2 million loan they had tried to pin on me. I did not call the police. I did not send a threatening email. Instead, I uploaded chord to a public music sharing platform and tagged every major tech journalist and intellectual property attorney in the country. I included a brief clinical description of the frequency response data embedded in the track. I hit the upload button at the exact moment Arthur lifted his glass for the opening toast. "To the Vance legacy," Arthur said on the screen, his voice booming with unearned confidence. A legacy built on integrity and vision. As he spoke, the internet began to do what it does best. The song did not just go viral because of the music. It went viral because it was a puzzle that thousands of tech enthusiasts began to solve in real time. Within 20 minutes, chord was being played across every social media platform. The audio watermark was verified by independent software engineers. The hashtag #VanceFraud began to trend alongside the wedding photos. I watched the screen as the guests at the wedding began to look at their phones. The whispers started in the back row and moved like a wildfire toward the front. Sloane's smile faltered. Arthur's face turned a ghostly shade of gray as his chief of security leaned in to whisper something in his ear. The applause they had expected for their merger was replaced by the deafening silence of a room realizing they were witnessing a collapse. I walked out onto my porch and looked at the ocean. For 24 years, my voice had been a sound no one bothered to hear. Now, my silence was the loudest thing in the world. I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with the Vance name and everything to do with the boy who had once played piano by the riverbank. The melody of chord was finally complete. I was no longer a shadow in their story. I was the one who had rewritten the ending. The Port Juniper Community Center was a far cry from the cold vaulted ceilings of the Vance estate. The room was small, filled with the scent of saltwater old wood and the genuine warmth of people who did not know my net worth or my family's reputation. They were here for the music. As I sat at the weathered upright piano, my fingers felt light. For the first time in 24 years, I was not playing to earn a place at a table that was never mine. I was playing because the sound finally belonged to me. I played chord. The melody drifted through the room like the evening fog over the harbor, sometimes heavy and haunting, other times bright and resilient. When the final note faded into the silence of the hall, the audience did not offer the polite, measured clapping of Aspen Hollow. They stood. Their applause was a tidal wave, unforced and sincere. I bowed my head not in submission, but in a profound, quiet recognition of my own existence. I had finally found a frequency that resonated with the truth. As I walked out toward the docks after the performance, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a private number, but I knew the rhythm of its persistence. I stepped onto the wooden pier, the Atlantic Ocean churning beneath my feet, and answered. "Julian." My mother's voice came through, but the clinical ice was gone. It was replaced by a frantic, jagged desperation. "Julian, you have to stop this. The journalists are everywhere. The auditors have frozen the merger accounts. Pierce is threatening to walk away, and the board is calling for a full investigation into your father's intellectual property filings. I listened to the wind whistling through the rigging of the nearby sailboats. I did not feel the surge of triumph I had expected. I only felt a deep, hollow pity. "Julian, are you listening?" Arthur's voice broke in on the line. He sounded aged, his authority stripped away by the very technology he had stolen. "If you do not issue a statement saying the Cord software watermark was a mistake, Sloan's company will be bankrupt by Monday. Everything we built, the Vance name, the estate, it will all be gone. You are our son. You cannot do this to your own blood." I looked out at the horizon where the dark blue of the sea met the obsidian of the night sky. Blood is just a biological fact, Arthur." I said, my voice as calm as the deep water. "Family is something you earn through loyalty and respect. You traded both for a $2 million forgery and a stolen patent." "Julian, please," Eleanor pleaded, her voice cracking. "We can fix this. We can go back to the way things were. Just come home. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you were confused." I remembered the broken clock in the living room at Aspen Hollow. I remembered the 19-year-old version of myself crying in the kitchen because I thought I was not enough. I remembered the exact moment she told me I was a stain on a wedding dress. "Mother," I said the word feeling strange and final on my tongue. "You told me that the greatest gift I could give for the wedding was to disappear from this family forever. I spent my whole life trying to give you everything you asked for. I decided that for once I should finally be a good son and honor your wish." "We did not mean it like that," she cried. "I know exactly what you meant," I replied softly. "The gift is complete. I have disappeared. Julian Reed Vance no longer exists in your ledger. The person you are talking to is just a musician in a small town who owes you nothing." "You are destroying us," Arthur roared. "No," I said. "I am just letting the truth finish what you started. Goodbye." I ended the call before they could utter another word. I looked at the contact list on the screen, the names that had defined my cage for over 2 decades. With a single steady thumb, I selected the Vance family group, the lawyers they had used to intimidate me, and the childhood home address. I hit delete. I took the phone and walked to the edge of the pier. For a moment, I thought about throwing it into the ocean, but I realized I did not need a dramatic gesture to be free. The freedom was already inside me. I simply turned the device off and placed it in my pocket. I walked down to the shoreline of Juniper Beach. The sand was cold and damp under my boots. The waves crashed against the shore, a relentless, powerful force that reset the world with every pulse. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the salt air. I had not sought revenge through violence or noise. I had simply stopped holding up the ceiling of a house that wanted to crush me. By choosing myself, I had forced them to face the architecture of their own lies. Tomorrow, I would start the composition for the film project. Tomorrow, I would have coffee with Zoe at the Harbor Cafe. Tomorrow, I would wake up in a house where the clocks actually moved forward. The greatest revenge was not their ruin. It was my joy. It was the fact that I could stand in the dark listening to the ocean and finally feel at home in my own skin. I looked up at the stars, clear and bright above the mist of Port Juniper. I was no longer a shadow. I was the light. I turned away from the water and began the long walk back to my cottage, humming a melody that belonged to no one but me. How did Julian's story resonate with you? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback helps me create even better content. If this journey touched your heart, follow for more meaningful stories about healing and choosing yourself. Your support means everything to a voice that finally found its strength.